She called me at 2 a.m. She said she hadn't slept in 6 days. And then she told me about the apartment. This story came from a woman in Seoul. She asked me not to use her real name. I've called her Jiyeon. Everything else, the apartment, the time, the voice, is exactly as she described it to me. The fog came in off the Han River sometime before noon and never really left. By the time Jiyeon arrived at the building in Mapo-gu, the whole city had that soft, blurred look, like someone had pressed a thumb against a photograph before it had fully dried. She stood on the pavement outside, 2 bags at her feet and a set of keys in her hand, and looked up at the building. 12 floors, grey concrete, a few windows lit yellow even in the middle of the afternoon. The kind of building that has a name posted near the entrance, but nobody ever uses it. Unit 412 was on the 4th floor. The elevator smelled like cigarette smoke and cleaning spray, which meant someone had tried. The hallway carpet was dark green, the kind that hides everything. She found her door, tried the key twice before it caught, and stepped inside. The apartment was clean. That was the first thing she noticed. Not just swept, actually clean, the way places are when someone has left recently and tried hard not to leave anything of themselves behind. The kitchen counter was bare. The bathroom had no water stains around the drain. The walls were white and unscuffed. Jiyeon set her bags down in the middle of the empty living room and listened to the quiet, which in Seoul is never fully quiet. There was traffic somewhere below, and the sound of a TV through the ceiling. But in the apartment itself, nothing moved. She had no furniture yet. The table she'd ordered was coming Thursday, so she unpacked what she could, clothes into the closet, toiletries lined up on the bathroom shelf, a small framed photo of her mother placed face down on the kitchen counter because she hadn't decided where to put it yet. Then she sat cross-legged on the bare floor of the living room with a triangle of cold kimbap from the convenience store downstairs and ate in the grey afternoon light. It was a good apartment for the price. She kept telling herself this. 4 stops on the subway to her new office. A window that faced east, which meant morning light. The walls were thick enough that she could barely hear the neighbor's television. She had made the right decision. She repeated this quietly, the way people do when they need it to be true. She fell asleep on the floor around 9, her jacket folded under her head, her phone face up beside her. She hadn't meant to sleep there. She'd only meant to rest her eyes while waiting for a call from her sister that never came. The apartment was dark when she woke up. Not completely dark. The city light came in through the thin curtain she'd hung earlier, casting the room in a faint orange wash. The traffic had quieted. The ceiling TV was off. She lay still for a moment, not sure what had pulled her up from sleep, checking inside herself for the feeling that something was wrong. Then she heard it. It came from the wall to her left, the wall that shared space with the bathroom, or maybe with whatever was behind the bathroom, the building's internal structure that she didn't know and couldn't see. It was a voice, a woman's voice, low and steady, the way a person speaks when they are not trying to be heard, but are not trying to be quiet either. It was the tone of someone speaking in an empty room, to themselves, or to someone very close. It said her name, just that. 1 word, or maybe 2, her full name, both syllables, the way her mother used to say it when calling her in from somewhere. Not shouted, not whispered, simply spoken at a normal volume from inside the wall. Jiyeon sat up, She stayed very still and listened. She listened for the radiator, because radiators sometimes sound like voices in old buildings. She listened for a pipe, a creak, a television in the next apartment. She listened for any other sound that might explain what she had just heard. The building was silent. She stood up, crossed to the wall, and pressed her palm flat against it. The plaster was cool. She stayed like that for a long time, not breathing very much, waiting. Nothing. She went back to the floor and lay down. She pulled her jacket tighter. She told herself what she'd heard was the tail end of a dream. Not unusual in a new place, a new city, a new life that still felt like it belonged to someone else. She closed her eyes, but she did not go back to sleep. She lay there in the orange-gray light with her eyes closed and her breathing careful, and she knew, in the way the body knows things before the mind agrees, that what she had heard was real. It had come from inside the wall. It had said her name. And the reason it had almost not frightened her, the reason her heart had not thrown itself against her ribs the way it should have, was something she did not want to think about yet. The voice had sounded familiar. She kept her eyes shut and waited for morning, and the fog outside stayed exactly where it was, and the apartment did not make another sound. 3 days passed. Jiyeon unpacked the rest of her things, hung 2 prints on the living room wall, and bought a small table from a shop near the subway exit. She cooked rice in the evenings, left the kitchen light on while she ate, and did not think about the voice. This was something she was actively doing, not thinking about it, and it took enough effort that she noticed herself doing it, which made it harder. On the 4th morning, a Saturday, she went downstairs to the management office on the ground floor. The superintendent was a man in his 60s named Mr. O, broad-shouldered with a careful, unhurried way of speaking. The kind of person who has answered many questions and learned not to be surprised by any of them. He was eating a cup of instant noodles when she knocked on the open door. She asked about the previous tenants in Unit 412. She tried to make it sound casual. She was new. She was curious. She liked to know a little about a place before she fully settled in. Mr. O set down his noodles and looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. 7 tenants, 11 years. The most recent had left in the spring. A young man, a graduate student, who had broken his lease 4 months in and forfeited his deposit without asking for an explanation meeting. Before him, a woman in her 30s who had stayed 6 months. Before her, a couple who had lasted 8. None of them had stayed a year. Mr. O read the names out slowly, tapping each one with a blunt finger, and Jiyeon wrote them on the back of a receipt she found in her pocket, because she hadn't thought to bring paper. Did any of them say why they left? She asked. Mr. O looked at the folder, not at her. People leave for all kinds of reasons, he said. Work, family, the rent goes up. He closed the folder. It's a good apartment, quiet building. She thanked him and went back upstairs. She dropped an earring that afternoon, a small silver one, a gift from her sister, and it rolled under the edge of the baseboard in the bedroom near the far wall. She knelt down with her phone's flashlight and swept it along the floor. And there, wedged into a gap where the baseboard had pulled slightly away from the wall, was the earring and something else. A slim notebook, the kind sold at every stationery shop in the country. Dark blue cover, about the size of her hand. She sat on the floor of the bedroom and opened it. The handwriting inside was small and slanted slightly to the left, the kind of handwriting that looks like the person learned it carefully and then gradually stopped caring about neatness. The entries had dates at the top. The earliest was from 3 years ago, March 4th. Heard it again last night. Same time, just before 1 in the morning. Always the same wall. I've checked the pipes twice now. Nothing. The building manager says the wiring is old, but that shouldn't make a sound like that. It knows my name. I keep writing that down because I need to see it in my own handwriting to believe it. It knows my name. March 19th. It doesn't sound angry. That's the part I can't explain to anyone. I've tried telling myself it's threatening, that I should be afraid in the normal way. But it doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like someone calling me in from outside. Like I've been somewhere I shouldn't be. And now it's time to come home. I don't know why that's worse. April 2nd. I looked at the corner tonight. I know I said I wouldn't. I couldn't help it. My eyes just went there in the dark, the way eyes do when you're trying not to look at something. I don't want to write what I saw. I'm going to sleep with the light on. I think I need to leave this apartment. I think I've needed to leave for a while, and I've been. That was the last entry. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, on a Wednesday in early April. The pen had dragged slightly at the end of the last word, leaving a short, thin line. The kind a pen makes when someone sets it down quickly or is pulled away by something else. Jiyeon sat with the notebook in her lap for a long time. Outside, the afternoon was going grey again. The fog had come back. It seemed to always come back, as if the city couldn't quite dry itself out. She could hear rain starting against the window, very faint, more like pressure than sound. She turned back to the first entry and read all 3 again, slowly. Then she read them a 4th time. She was looking for the name of the person who had written them, but there was none. No name on the cover, no signature at the end of any entry. Just the dates, just the facts of what had happened, written out in small, careful letters by someone who had needed to make sense of something and had not managed to before they left. Jiyeon thought about the list of 7 names on the back of her receipt. One of them had written this. One of them was still reachable, maybe. One of them knew what happened when you looked at the corner of the bedroom in the dark. She put the notebook on the kitchen table, face up. She made herself a cup of tea. She didn't drink. She stood at the window and watched the rain move across the rooftops of Mapo-gu in slow, grey sheets. The voice did not come that night, or the night after. The silence she found was not a relief. It was the feeling of being watched by something that had decided, for now, to be patient. It took Jiyeon 4 days to find her. She started with the list of 7 names on the back of the receipt. 2 of them had no trace online at all. Deleted accounts, disconnected numbers, the kind of absence that could mean anything. 2 more she reached by phone. Both said hello, heard her explain which apartment she was calling about, and hung up without a word. One man replied to her message with a single line. Please don't contact me again. She didn't. The 6th name on the list was a woman named Haesun. She had a profile on a community gardening forum still active, last posted 2 weeks ago, about growing perilla on a balcony in Incheon. Jiyeon sent her a message through the forum late on a Wednesday night, short and careful, explaining only that she was a new tenant in Unit 412 and that she had found something left behind and had a few questions, if Haesun was willing. Haesun replied at 6 the next morning. One line. Not by phone. In person only and not in Seoul. They met at a Pojangmacha near the Incheon waterfront on a Friday evening. It was the kind of place with orange plastic stools and a gas flame under a wide flat pan, steam rising into the cold air, the smell of fish cake and soy broth drifting out into the street. Jiyeon arrived first and sat with her hands around a paper cup of barley tea, watching the water, which was flat and dark and gave nothing back. Hysun was 53, sturdy and straight-backed, with short graying hair and the careful, unhurried face of a person who had made decisions about what she would and wouldn't carry anymore. She sat down across from Jiyeon without taking off her coat. She ordered soju, but didn't pour it. She set her hands flat on the table and looked at Jiyeon the way a doctor looks at a patient. Not unkindly, but with a kind of assessment happening behind the eyes. You heard the voice, Hasten said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jiyeon said. How long ago? The first night. Hasten nodded slowly. She looked out at the water. A cargo ship was moving across the far edge of the harbor, very slowly, its lights reflected in long orange lines on the surface. I lived there for 7 months, she said. I heard it the first week. By the 3rd month, I was sleeping in the living room with every light on and a fan running so I wouldn't hear it through the wall. She paused. It didn't help. You can hear it through a fan. You can hear it through anything. Do you know who it is? Jiyeon asked. Haesun was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone choosing. A woman died in that apartment in 1998, she said finally. In the bedroom. I found out from a woman who had lived in the building since before the renovation. She was on the 8th floor. Very old, she told me, without being asked, the way old people sometimes do. Haesun's hands shifted slightly on the table. She said the woman who died had a daughter, young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old at the time. There was some kind of accident. The daughter survived, the mother didn't. The gas flame under the pan hissed. Someone at the next table laughed at something. A short, bright sound that dissolved quickly in the cold air. So the voice, Jiyeon began, is looking for someone, Haesun said. That's what I think. I don't think it knows how much time has passed. I don't think it understands that anyone other than the daughter would be living there. She finally looked directly at Jiyeon. You need to understand, the people who left that apartment didn't leave because they were in danger. They left because they couldn't bear it, because something that sad, night after night, in your own wall, it gets inside you. It starts to feel like it's your grief, not someone else's. Jiyeon thought about the journal, the entry that ended mid-sentence, the thin drag of the pen at the end of the last word. The notebook, she said, in the floor. Was that yours? Haesun looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked away. Keep it, she said. I don't want it back. They sat for another 20 minutes. Haesun drank nothing. The soju bottle stood between them, like something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Before she left, she pulled her coat tighter and looked at Jiyeon with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite warning. Something between the two. The look of a person handing over information they wish they didn't have. There's one more thing, she said. The far right corner of the bedroom. Don't look at it at night. She said it plainly, without drama. The way you'd tell someone not to touch a hot pan. If you wake up in the dark, don't let your eyes go there. Keep them on the ceiling, on the window, on anything else. What happens if I do? Jiyeon asked. Haesun stood up from the stool and adjusted her bag on her shoulder. It shows you something, she said. Something that looks like a memory, but it isn't a memory. She looked at Jiyeon one last time. It's an offer, and once you've seen it, it's very hard to say no to. She walked away along the waterfront without looking back. Jiyeon sat with the untouched soju and the dying heat of the pojang matcha and watched her go until she was just a dark shape against the harbor lights. And then, nothing at all. The last train back to Seoul was at 11:40. Jiyeon sat in the empty carriage with her forehead resting against the cold window and watched the city slide past in the dark. The lit windows of apartment buildings stacked against the hills, the orange glow of convenience stores, the long grey overpasses rising and falling above the black shapes of the roads below. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly like a city where people lived ordinary lives and went to sleep in ordinary rooms and woke up in the morning without having heard anything in the walls. She got back to Unit 412 just after midnight. She brushed her teeth, changed her clothes, lay down on her bed. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the window. She looked at the place where the curtain moved slightly in a draft she couldn't feel from the bed. She told herself what Haesun had told her. She repeated it clearly in her mind, word for word. The way you repeat a rule you know you're going to break. And then, the way eyes always do when you've told them not to. Her eyes moved to the far right corner of the bedroom. The dark there was different. Heavier, somehow. The way certain silences are louder than others. She stared into it, her heart very quiet, her body very still. And something in the corner began to take shape. At first, it was just a change in the light. The corner had been dark, the ordinary dark of a room at midnight with the curtain drawn. And then, it wasn't. Not bright. Nothing so sudden as that. More like the dark thinning. The way ice thins over water in early spring, slowly enough that you don't notice until it's already different. Jiyeon lay on her back with her eyes fixed on that corner and felt her breathing slow to almost nothing, the way the body does when it has decided that being very still is the safest available option. The kitchen appeared first. Not her kitchen, or rather, her kitchen, but wrong. The layout was the same. Counter along the left wall. The window above the sink. The small space between the refrigerator and the door frame. But the wallpaper was different. A pale pattern of small repeating flowers she had never chosen and had never seen in that room. And the refrigerator was an older model, rounded at the corners, the kind that belonged to a decade she had been too young to remember. The fluorescent light above the counter was on. It cast everything in that particular flat yellow that fluorescent lights used to give before they were replaced by something cooler and cleaner. Under that light, the kitchen looked both very ordinary and very far away, like a room seen through the wrong end of a telescope. And then Jiyeon saw the woman. She was standing at the counter with her back to the room, stirring something in a pot. The steam rose slowly. She was wearing a pale yellow cardigan, slightly too large. The sleeves pushed up to the elbows, the way you push sleeves up when you are doing something practical and don't want them in the way. Her hair was dark and cut to just below her ears. She was not tall. She stood with her weight shifted slightly to her left foot, which was the way a person stands when they have been standing for a while and are comfortable, not tired. She was not aware of being watched. She stirred. She reached forward and adjusted the flame under the pot without looking at it. The automatic gesture of someone who has made this exact thing in this exact kitchen enough times that her hands knew where everything was without asking. Jiyeon's chest tightened. She knew that posture. She lay completely still and watched, and the recognition came the way difficult things always come. Not all at once, but in pieces, each one arriving before she was ready for the next. The slope of the shoulders, the way the left hand rested on the counter's edge between stirs, fingers loosely curled, the particular angle of the head when the woman tilted it slightly, listening for something, a sound from another room, maybe, or just the sound of the building settling around her. These were not things Jiyeon knew she had memorized. They were not things she would have said she remembered. But the body keeps records that the mind doesn't know about, and hers were open now, page after page. The woman in the kitchen was her mother, young, younger than Jiyeon had ever consciously known her, younger than any photograph she could place, younger than the person she had carried in her memory for 26 years. This was her mother, at maybe 28 or 29, before the lines came, before the grey, before the careful quietness that had settled over her in later years, like a piece of clothing she never took off. This was her mother when she was simply a young woman cooking in her kitchen at night, alive and unhurried and completely unaware that she was being seen. The steam from the pot drifted upward and dissolved into the yellow light. The woman stirred once more, slowly, and then set the spoon down on the counter and stood very still for a moment, her head tilted at that slight listening angle. From somewhere in the vision, from the direction of the bedroom, or perhaps from somewhere that had no direction, came the sound of a small child shifting in sleep. The woman's shoulders relaxed. She reached forward and turned the flame down low. She began to hum, something low and simple, not quite a melody, more like the sound of someone keeping themselves company in a quiet room. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly. The wallpaper flowers repeated their small pale pattern across every wall. The refrigerator hummed back at her, and the two sounds together made a kind of chord that was not music, but was not nothing either. Jiyeon realized her face was wet. She hadn't noticed the crying start. It had happened somewhere in the gap between recognition and understanding. In the few seconds when she had known who she was looking at, before she had let herself know what it meant. Her mother had lived here, in this apartment, in this kitchen, in this room, with the flower wallpaper that someone had later stripped and painted over white. She had cooked at this counter and listened for the sounds of her sleeping child and hummed to herself in the yellow light of a Tuesday or a Thursday in 1997, the year before Jiyeon was old enough to form the kind of memories that stay. The journal in the floor had been written in her mother's hand. The voice in the wall had spoken in her mother's voice. 7 people had moved into this apartment and fled from a grief that was never meant for them. A name called out in the dark by a woman who did not know, could not know, that the daughter she was waiting for would not arrive looking the way she remembered. The vision did not end dramatically. The kitchen light did not snap off. There was no sound, no sudden cold, none of the things Jiyeon might have expected. The image simply softened, the edges going first, then the counter, then the steam, and last of all, the pale yellow cardigan with its pushed-up sleeves that stayed the longest, a shape without a room around it. And then that too was gone, and the corner was just a corner again, dark and ordinary, and full of nothing at all. Jiyeon lay on her back in the silence for a long time. She understood now what Haesun had meant by the word offer. The vision had not been a haunting in the way she would have described a haunting before tonight. It was not designed to frighten. It was an opening, a small, unlocked door in the wall between what was and what had been. And on the other side of it, her mother was cooking, alive and warm and close enough to touch. And all Jiyeon would have had to do was walk through. She understood why people had trouble saying no. She also understood, lying there in the dark with the tears drying on her face, that saying yes to a door like that was the same as saying yes to staying inside it forever. That the woman in the kitchen was not waiting for someone to visit. She was waiting for someone to come home. And home, in the language of that kind of waiting, meant not leaving again. She sat up slowly. She looked at the corner. It was just a corner. The dark there was the same as the dark everywhere else. She picked up her phone from the floor beside the bed and looked at the time. Just past 2 in the morning. The city outside was quiet enough that she could hear rain, very faint, just beginning. She set the phone back down and sat on the edge of the bed, with her feet on the floor, her hands in her lap, her breathing slow and deliberate. Her mother had lived here, had cooked here, had listened here for the sounds of a small child sleeping. And then something had happened. Something the old woman on the 8th floor had called an accident and said no more about. And the listening had never stopped. It had just run out of the right person to listen for, until now. Jiyeon sat in the dark of Unit 412 and felt the weight of that. The long, patient, 26-year weight of it settle across her shoulders like a hand. She did not pull away from it. She did not move for a long time after the vision faded. She sat on the edge of the bed with her feet flat on the floor and her hands resting open in her lap. And she let the understanding settle through her, the way cold settles through a room when the heating goes off, slowly, from the top down, filling every space that had been warm before. The rain against the window had grown slightly heavier. The city beyond the glass was doing what it always did, which was to keep going, indifferent and lit, the way cities are at 2 in the morning, when most people are asleep and the ones who aren't are sitting in the dark with something they haven't yet figured out how to carry. Jiyeon looked at the notebook on the kitchen table. She could see it from the bedroom doorway, dark blue cover, lying open to the last entry. The one that ended mid-sentence with the thin drag of the pen. Her mother's handwriting. Her mother's handwriting, which she had read 4 times without knowing it was her mother's handwriting. The same way she had heard her mother's voice in the wall and almost not been frightened because some part of her had already known. The body keeps its records. She had thought that earlier. It was still true. She got up, not with any particular plan. Her legs simply decided it was time, and she followed them. She walked to the bedroom doorway and stood there for a moment, looking at the apartment around her. The kitchen with its white walls where the flower wallpaper used to be. The counter where her mother had stood with her sleeves pushed up, stirring something, listening. The window above the sink, the same window, the same view of the same rooftops and the same orange wash of city light that had been there in 1997 and was still there now. She sat down on the floor, not in the bedroom, not in the kitchen, in the space between, in the narrow corridor of the hallway where the 2 rooms met. With her back against the wall, and her knees drawn up, and her head tilted back. It was the kind of sitting that had nothing strategic about it. It was just the floor, and she needed to be on it. She started talking, not loudly. She used the same volume she would use if she were talking to someone in the same room who was close enough to hear without trying. She didn't think carefully about the words first. She just said the things that were there, the things that had been sitting in her chest for years, taking up space she had never figured out how to reclaim. She talked about growing up, not understanding why she felt unmoored in every home she lived in, like a piece of furniture that belonged to a different room. She talked about the photograph she had placed face down on the kitchen counter the day she arrived, and how she still hadn't decided where to put it, and how that small indecision had probably never been about wall space. She talked about the Tuesday evenings she had spent alone in other apartments in other cities, and the specific quality of silence that came on those evenings. Not peaceful, but hollow. The silence of a space shaped for more people than it currently held. She talked about missing someone she barely remembered, about how grief for a person you lost too young doesn't feel like grief exactly. It feels like a room in your memory with the door slightly open, and you never go inside, but you always know it's there. She was not performing any of this. There was no one to perform for. Or perhaps there was exactly one, which amounted to the same thing. She spoke the way you speak when there is finally enough silence to hear yourself. At some point, she couldn't have said exactly when, the quality of the apartment changed. Not dramatically, not with any sound or movement or shift in the light. It was more like the feeling when a conversation that has been slightly tense finally relaxes, when the person across from you lets something go, and their whole face changes by almost nothing. And yet, you see it completely. The air in the hallway felt different, less weighted, like something that had been held for a very long time had been, at last, gently set down. Jiyeon stopped talking. She sat in the quiet and breathed. The rain continued. The city continued. The refrigerator in the kitchen made its low, even hum, the same hum it had made on the first night she arrived, though it sounded different to her now. Not lonely, just present, just a machine doing its one patient job in a kitchen where someone had once cooked and hummed and listened for a sleeping child, and where someone was now sitting on the floor at 3 a.m, talking to the walls, which was perhaps not so different. She did not feel the presence leave. That was the thing she would come back to later, in the weeks that followed, turning it over. There was no departure, no resolution in the dramatic sense, no moment of release that she could point to and say, there, that was when it ended. It was more that the waiting stopped, like a question that had been suspended in the air for 26 years, finally receiving an answer. Not a perfect answer, not a complete one, but enough to let the asking rest. She fell asleep on the floor of the hallway and woke up with the morning light coming through the kitchen window in a long pale stripe across the floor. Her neck ached. Her hands were cold. She lay there for a moment, blinking, looking at the stripe of light, and then she got up and went to the kitchen table where the notebook was. She had left it open to the last entry, the page with the unfinished sentence and the thin drag of the pen. It was still open, but the page was no longer blank. Below her mother's last line, near the bottom of the page, in handwriting she did not recognize, smaller than her mother's, less slanted, the writing of someone who had not held a pen in a very long time, and was doing their best was a single sentence. 7 words, written in ink that was the same color as the rest of the notebook's entries, as if it had always been there, and she had simply not been ready to see it before now. I knew it was you from the beginning. Jiyeon stood at the kitchen table for a long time, reading those 7 words. She read them the way you read something that is both an answer and a question, something that closes one door and leaves another slightly open. She did not know, and would never entirely know, whether to understand them as comfort or as sorrow. Whether her mother had meant, "I recognized you and I was glad," or whether she had meant, "I recognized you and I could not say so, and now at last I can." Perhaps both. Perhaps the same sentence held both things at once, the way most true sentences do. She stayed in Unit 4, 1-2. She never told anyone what had happened. Not her sister, not her colleagues, not the building superintendent, who still nodded at her in the elevator with his careful, unhurried face and never asked questions. She moved the small framed photograph of her mother from the kitchen counter to the windowsill above the sink, where the morning light reached it first. In the evenings, when she cooked, she left the kitchen light on. She had started doing this without thinking about it, sometime in the first week after the night on the floor, and she kept doing it without deciding to. The light was on while she cooked, and she sometimes found herself standing at the counter with her sleeves pushed up, stirring something, and the quietness around her was not the hollow kind anymore. It was the kind that has something in it, a presence that had stopped waiting and started simply being. The way the people we have lost eventually stop being absences and start being the small, ordinary parts of how we live, the habits they left in us, the things we do without knowing why, the lights we leave on. The voice did not come again. The corner of the bedroom was just a corner. Some nights, just before sleep, Jiyeon would lie still and listen to the building around her, the soft sounds of other lives through the walls, footsteps above, a door closing somewhere below. And she would feel, not happiness exactly, but something in the same direction, the feeling of a room that fits, the feeling, quiet and without explanation, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She had come home without knowing she was looking for it. And that, in the end, was the whole story. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.